few more joining us. I'm just going to wait 1 minute more and then I'll kick things off. But thank you so much for being on time. Very good. Let's kick things off. Hello, I'm Catherine Rich. I'm the Chief Executive of the New Zealand Food and Grocery Council, and I'm delighted that you've taken time out in your day to join us to talk about the very important issues relating to safety. So it's my great pleasure to welcome our speaker and acknowledge Ruth Cook. Ruth gives us an opportunity on behalf of the Food and Grocery Council to thank you for your stellar leadership within Worksafe, and we thank you for the collaboration that you do and the way that you live and breathe all things safety. So thank you again to everybody attending. Can I acknowledge CEO of ShopCare, Liz May, and her team, Catherine, Wes and Shirley. Again, this is another example of a wonderful collaboration between the Food and Grocery Council, ShopCare and today Worksafe to focus our members' attention and all those within our industry on issues which allow us hopefully to increase not just health and safety practices, but also health and safety leadership within our grocery sector. And as we all know, there's quite a lot of work to do. So today we're going to be talking about the subject of working in and around vehicles, which I think is a really great area for us to all lift our game. I'm going to start first just by touching on a few housekeeping issues. So I will ask you all to mute yourselves. And also, if you like to want to put your machines onto speaker view, that can sometimes be less distracting than having all of our faces popping up, but that's up to you. So with a group as manageable as it is today, there'll be plenty of opportunities for questions. And depending on how things go, the opportunity to unmute yourself and put your questions directly maybe and engage in a bit of a discussion. But without further ado, I'd like to hand you to the wonderful CE of ShopCare, Liz May, and she's going to look after you from this point. But Liz, can I thank you for the work you do on behalf of us all, the way you bring the industry together, every part of it. And already I know the work that you and the team have done has had a big impact and it's going to continue to do so. So thank you very much, Liz. Over to you.
Great, thanks, Catherine. Good afternoon, everybody. And I have to say, just in terms of questions, we've had some great questions in the previous sessions that we've had, so no pressure to everybody listening today. Before I get started, we're just going to run a number of polls. We'll have 4 polls during the session this afternoon, and we're going to do the first one now. So Shirley, if you could start the first poll, would be great. Have we got the first poll running, Shirley?
Yes, I can, Catherine here, Liz, I can see it. I've just...
Oh, good. I can't see it.
And the results are on screen. And back to you.
Thanks, Shirley. So as you all are aware, we're here primarily to listen to Ruth Cook today talking about Worksafe's Working in and Around Vehicle program. Over the last 2 years, Worksafe has been looking to better understand harms that are common across sectors, and one of these is the harm caused to people who work in and around vehicles. Almost every business involves a vehicle movement in some way, whether it's delivery of raw goods, moving things around the warehouse, or getting things out to customers. Because vehicles are so widespread, it's easy to become comfortable with the risks they present. But the message today, and you'll hear from Ruth, is that we can all do something different and we all need to do something different. Before I introduce Ruth and hand over to Ruth, I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about ShopCare, who we are and what we do. I'm going to introduce you to the team who'll chat for a couple of minutes about our key work streams and project that we think that you'll be interested in. Now, first of all, ShopCare is a not-for-profit organisation funded by ACC and key industry members. How do we get here? So we started, many years ago actually, there used to be an old safety working group, and this is a very long story short. And that safety working group sat under the Food and Grocery Council, realised that really to make any significant progress in improving health and safety in the industry, then there needed to be a group of people who actually had dedicated time and energy just to spend on this topic. We've been running for just over a year, and of course we lost a few months with COVID last year, and we support all organisations who operate within the product life cycle, from manufacturing all the way through to the retail shelf. ShopCare's role is to drive industry collaboration through a coordinated approach to industry sharing and problem solving, and we talk about connecting people to people and people to solutions. So how do we do that? We profile best practice methodology, create knowledge sharing opportunities just like this one, and develop industry agreed standards. And there are lots of ways that you can get involved in ShopCare and take advantage for your business of what we're doing. And one of the easiest ways to be involved is when you have a health and safety problem, which people have most weeks, is get in touch and we'll see what information we already have on that topic. Or if we don't have anything ourselves, and we'll reach out to our wide network and find out who can help you. As I said, we're all about connecting people to people and people to solutions. Just let someone else in. I'll just go on and introduce the team. So Wesley, you'll hear speak in a few minutes, and Wesley has a long career in health, safety and wellbeing in the marine, manufacturing, engineering and retail sectors. And Catherine Ross, who's had a long career in the education sector. And Wes and Catherine are going to talk you through our key work streams, and then Wes will talk you through our critical risk piece of work, which we're really excited about. So before I hand over to Catherine, there'll be another short poll. Thank you, Shirley.
Liz, I think some of us just got the results of the last poll.
Okay.
So my apologies, but I can't see. Second poll, where is it?
Just click on the top right hand side.
There it is.
Shirley.
And Ruth will talk about the answer to the second poll when she does her presentation shortly.
This might wait for a couple more. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Shirley. Thanks for doing that. And now I'll hand over to Catherine.
Thanks, Liz. So just we can see the results of the poll there. So actually Ruth will end up talking about the results of that poll in a moment. So thanks, Shirley. You can just close the poll now. So thanks everyone. As Liz said, I'm Catherine. I'm going to talk to you about a couple of the items on this next slide. So if we start at the sort of 2 o'clock area on the slide there that starts with the transport, I'm going to talk to you about 2 of our key work streams, and then I'm going to hand over to my colleague Wes, who's going to talk to you about the other 2, and then finally, as Liz mentioned, talking to you about the critical risks project. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is transport. Now we are at the moment are in the midst of developing a transport health, safety and wellbeing charter for the retail, transport and supply chain sectors. And our initial focus here is to look upon a hierarchy of standards for heavy goods vehicles. And these may range from something quite as simple as easily marked bathroom facilities for drivers at their unloading zones to more technical or engineered solutions. We are working with government and Worksafe and NZTA, for example, to support this initiative. But the important point here is that it's an industry-led initiative for industry. And if you'd like some more information on that, please do get in touch with me afterwards, and our details will be at the end of the presentation. Moving on to the sort of 5 o'clock part on the clock there. Site traffic management, that's really a significant focal area for those businesses that we engage with. And as Liz notes, one of our purposes is really to engage people together, connect people to people and people to solutions. And an opportunity came to light with Ruth, where we thought we could actually take some of the work that Ruth's been working on with Worksafe and highlight this to people like yourselves, and just share that opportunity. And further to the presentation that we will be delivering today with Ruth, we've also engaged industry with some sharing sessions whereby we can come together and businesses and individuals can share opportunities or challenges that they may have encountered and some of the solutions or controls to those problems. And I'll just hand over now to Wes, who's going to talk to you about the other areas on this. Thanks, Wes.
Thanks, Catherine. Good morning, everybody. My name is Wes, and I'm just going to really take you through a couple of our work streams that we've got left and the critical risk project as mentioned. So if you look at the bottom, just I would say around about 7 o'clock, that's got manual handling. That's one of our work streams. So there's a big focus from our industry on that, on the actual prevention or harm prevention, mitigation, and the management of manual handling. And we're seeking opportunities in the industry, where, for example, if we can educate what's the difference between discomfort and injury, because we found that there's quite a push in management that don't know the difference between foot and what's the actual injury. We'll also look at things like early notification of discomfort and early intervention procedures. We'll be looking at pre-employment screening, for example, so making sure we got the right person for the right task, and we don't employ somebody there where we place them at a higher risk in their job. And further along, we will try to standardize some of that injury management approach, and that's all part of that manual handling work stream. And if we just move on to the next work stream, it's called VAB, which is violent and aggressive behavior. Now, there's quite a big focus on the retailers in this aspect, and trying to prevent violent and aggressive behavior towards store workers, because there's quite a big growing concern in this area. But more to that, we'll have to wait and see as we are diving a bit more deeply into that area. And then lastly, from a work stream point of view, we've got critical risks. Now, for critical risks, that's a very important thing for our industry, because number one, we didn't actually know what our industry looked like when we talked about critical risks. So one of the first things we had to do is get a view of the industry from a critical risk perspective and pinpoint those areas of opportunities. We started collecting data and transferring that data into insights and sharing those insights with the actual industry. We are looking at online educational series and sharing sessions. What I mean by sharing sessions is we've hosted our first critical risk sharing session about a couple of weeks ago. On the topic was site traffic management, and these are individuals, businesses coming together where they share a particular problem from a critical risk point of view. They will also say what type of control they've used and how they went about it and what was the impact. So out of that, we've got quite a couple of good insights, and we are developing those into case studies. We're hosting our next one on driver safety, focused on light passenger vehicles, and this week, Thursday. So if you would like to be part of that, please feel free to get in contact with myself. Another part of critical risk controls we're looking at is developing a critical risk report, where we will dive a bit more deep into the actual industry, what it looks like, what is the most common ones, you know, what do we need to look out for, what are the controls for those, etc. And then lastly, we are building a critical risk resource, which I'm going to be talking up to now. Could we just move to the next slide, please? So, next slide. I'm not sure if it's Catherine or Shirley. Sorry, it seems to be some issues there. Okay, great. So the next slide, there's a bit of a graph there from a critical risk perspective. So from a critical risk resource perspective, we will be focusing on this top 7 as they start off with 10. So out of this data that I've been speaking about, we've collected from the industry. These are the top 7 most common critical risks that we've collected. We're not saying these are the most important ones for the industry. We are saying these are the most common ones. So if you look at the bottom one, that's our most common one. That's site traffic management. So no surprise there. That's also the topic of today's discussion. Following on with on-road driver safety, yet again, light passenger vehicles, hazardous substances following, working at height, basically falling from heights, mobile plant, machine safety and guarding, and lastly, transportation, which is heavy haulage. Well, if you look at this graph, what you can find interesting is that even though there's quite a lot of talk about mental health and mental wellness, which is vastly talked about nationwide, unfortunately, from the sample pool we've received so far, it did not make the top 7, which is interesting. I'm not saying there's anything to it. Maybe organizations just haven't identified them yet, or they're in the process of identifying. We just found it very interesting, seeing that as a quite public topic. Another thing, for example, is if you look at site traffic management, the transport sector hasn't identified that much as well, where other organizations have identified them. For example, manufacturing have identified it as a very critical thing. Also, light passenger vehicles, yet again, transport from the sample pool we've received has not identified driver safety from a light passenger vehicle point of view as one of their critical risks. Yet again, why that is, we're not sure. We're diving into a bit deep into that, and we hope to share those results with you sooner than later. So, in a nutshell, we are building this critical risk resource where we will be looking at all sides of critical risk that we've been collecting and controls. So the aim is then to provide it in a way to the general public, in a way where you can see this is the critical risks and these are all the associated controls in their various hierarchies. So it doesn't matter if it's eliminating or administrative controls, you'll be able to see them for that particular critical risk. And hopefully the aim is to, if you click on one of those, it will provide you an example of that control. So that's what we're currently working on, and we're very excited about it. So please stay in touch and watch out for that. That, from a critical risk resource point of view, is in a nutshell from my point of view. And before I hand you over to Liz, there is a third poll will be popping up now from Shirley. Thank you very much.
And third poll's up now. Just let a couple more finish their voting.
like to add that Zoom only gives us 10 options here, so that's why there is a maximum of 10 here.
Yeah, so we'll just share those results now.
So quite a wide range of results there, but interestingly enough to see 60% of attendees saying site traffic management, which is good.
Yeah, that is good.
Just realised there's a typo there as well, so apologies for that.
Okay, thanks, Shirley. And just one more poll later on. So now, if you do have any questions, then please pop them in the chat function. And when Ruth's finished her talk shortly, then we'll run through any questions. So it is my pleasure now to hand over to Ruth Cook, Engagement Lead at Worksafe. And what does an engagement lead do? Connect industry with Worksafe. And Ruth has a particular focus on the transport, postal and warehousing section. So I'll hand over to Ruth. Thanks again, Ruth, for coming along today.
Pleasure. And thank you ever so much, Liz and Catherine, for the introduction. Just checking, can I be seen all right? I'm hoping so. I can't see anything in my view, but anyway, let's keep going. So today I want to talk about two things. I want to talk about, firstly, what do we know about vehicle-related harm? And then secondly, if we are to make a difference, what are the areas that we need to address? So what do we know about vehicle-related harm, and what are the areas that we need to address if we are to make a difference? So that second part around what areas do we need to address to make a difference, that's going to be fairly high level, and because you all come from a wide variety of businesses. And so what I'm hoping is that this will prompt discussions, further discussions, together with ShopCare or FGC around what that actually looks like for you. So vehicle harms, and what do we know about them? They are low frequency but high impact events. So just to show you what that looks like, about 3% of ACC claims, injury claims, are linked to working in or around vehicles. But when that comes to fatalities, that jumps right up to 73%. So well done to those of you who put that in the poll just now. So about just under 3/4 of our acute workplace fatalities involve a vehicle of some sort. And if we think about the road toll, which is on our headlines daily, about 23% of the annual road toll in New Zealand is linked to a vehicle which is at work. So that doesn't include bystanders or commuters, that's just people while they're at work. So they are low frequency, but when things go wrong, they have very, very high impact. So you're probably thinking, well, which vehicles? Vehicles is pretty vague term, so we'll just go on to the next slide, if that's all right. Thank you so much, which shows you how that harm breaks down by vehicle type. So you can see right at the top there, at about 30% of the annual fatalities are linked to trucks and lorries. So, and then after that, you've got two groups of agriculture vehicles. So that's ATVs, often quad bikes, and then also tractors, so big chunk of agriculture vehicles. And then you've got mobile plants, utes, cars, light passenger vehicles. We won't talk about aircraft or watercraft today. And then we've got forklift trucks and other vehicles at the bottom. So those are the types of vehicles that are linked to fatalities. The other thing that this chart shows us is where is the harm taking place. So the green is the off-road portion, and the purple is on-road. So maybe no surprises that about 2/3 of the harm for trucks and semi-trailers and lorries takes place on road, but that number is then flipped around for the other vehicles. So in total, across all vehicle harm, most of it is taking place actually off-road. So whether that's on a farm, in a warehouse, on a construction site or quarry site, off-road vehicle harm is the majority of vehicle fatalities in New Zealand. So interesting view, but also important to keep in mind that the fatalities and the acute harm linked to vehicles here is just a really small percentage of the overall burden of harm that our workers are facing. Now, if I could just go to the next slide, because we know that actually you're much more likely to die of a work-related health issue than a work-related accident. So what are the key health issues linked to working in and around vehicles? Well, here's some key ones. Firstly, it's exposure to diesel exhaust. So you may be surprised to know that about 22 New Zealanders die every year as a result of exposure to diesel exhaust fumes at work. And then other things, back pain, other musculoskeletal issues, sun exposure, and then of course what's not written here, but we are getting better at talking and understanding this, is the psychosocial harm. So those are some of the key harms linked to working in or around a vehicle. You may be wondering, well, what's causing those harms? So we've just we'll go on to the next slide, which highlights some of the key harm mechanisms that link to those fatalities. So number one is site traffic management, and great to see that so many of you, I think it was 60%, are focusing on that at the moment, because we know, and you know, that that very complex dynamic interaction of people and plant in a complex changing environment, often 24/7, is a dangerous environment to work in. So it's site traffic management, it's load management, so load falling out of side loaders, loads falling off forklifts. It's falls, people tripping over forklift tines or falling out of vans or off the top of forklift tines or out of trucks. So all sorts of falls there. Non-use of seatbelts. You may think that we've got beyond talking about using seatbelts. Unfortunately, we haven't. And we know that 10 people a year die at work because they are not wearing a seatbelt as they operate a vehicle. So it's still very much got to be on our radar screen, the whole issue of seatbelts, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. The last one is perhaps the most complex, but also the most significant as far as causing vehicle-related harm, and that's upstream pressures. We all know that there's an increasing trend towards non-linear, decentralized and outsourced work, where risk is usually pushed downstream on to those who are least able to manage. So they are unable to effect change within their work environment. They face the burden of decisions made upstream that they are not able to influence because of how the business is organised and work is organised. So that last one, upstream pressures, and that's also an issue that we will come back to, because I think it's a really key one, and one that we need to be focusing more on if we are to see the dial change in vehicle-related harm. So vehicle harm is an issue. If we want to see something change, if we want to see a sustained and real change to the number of people who are killed each year because they work in and around vehicle, then I think we all have a role to play. I suppose this is my key message as we come on to our next slide now, that we all have a role to play and we all need to do something differently. No one can do everything, but we all can do something. So my question to you today is, what can you do differently? What is the one thing in your role as a health and safety professional or as a part of the FGC or shop care? What is one thing that you could be doing differently? And there are two areas that I want to suggest that you could think about this. The first, and I've already touched on this, is in the issue of how you work with others in the supply chain. So I've said that the supply chain is a key source of harm and pressure within the system. But I also believe that we can leverage off our duties under the Health and Safety at Work Act to drive better work down the supply chain. Because the Health and Safety at Work Act says that businesses have a duty of care not only for their own workers, but also for anyone who is influenced by your work. So your duties are not just for your own workers, but also for those who are influenced by your work. So do you know who is influenced downstream by your work? Do you know what is in place to look after the contractors or subcontractors who are operating vehicles on your site? Do you know if drivers who you buy transport from and who transport your goods, do you know if they're able to carry out their work safely and effectively in a reasonable time frame? Or if you contract out vehicles or transport services, do you ensure that the agreement allows good work to take place in vehicles with effective safety systems and safety features? Or if you're a landlord, do you know that the suppliers or contractors or subcontractors on your site have safe systems in place for operating vehicles? Have you ensured that there is good separation between people and plant? Now, I ask all those questions, and of course I could go on and on, but I think you get my point. And I ask these questions because, to the extent that we understand our responsibilities for those we influence, to that extent we will make changes. To the extent that we understand our responsibility, to that extent we will make changes. So what are some of the changes you could make? What are some of the things that you could be doing differently? So take a good look at who you are influencing. We're still on that the previous slide actually, but that's all right. Look at who you influence, even if it is a few steps down the chain. Have another look at how you manage overlapping duties. Monitor your contracts, your tendering process. Are they working? Is health and safety built into the way that you work around vehicles, rather than seen as an outside extra? Are contracts set up not just on price, but how they position people to carry out safe and effective work? So just a few things that you could be thinking about what you could do differently in the way that you work with other businesses and use the supply chain to drive better work. So, using the supply chain, one area that you could consider doing something differently. Another area that I would like to touch on around how you could be doing something differently is looking at the level of controls that you're using to manage vehicle harms. And it's really important that we are using the highest level possible of control to manage vehicle risks. And you might say, tell me something I don't know. However, when our inspectors are out and about, again and again, over and over, we see businesses managing not from the top of the hierarchy down, but from the bottom of the hierarchy up. Hardware requires you to use the highest possible control because the highest controls are the most effective. But it's easier, and this is where businesses tend to just start at the bottom and work their way up, relying, unfortunately, on things like administrative processes, instructions, signage, and PPE. So my call today is don't get complacent about how you manage the critical risks of working in and around vehicles. Review, evaluate what you're doing, and ensure that you are starting from the top, that you are providing the highest possible level of control for your people. So in our new site traffic management good practice guide, which is on our website, and I'll touch on that a little bit later, there's some really practical ways for working through the hierarchy of controls when it comes to site traffic management. So for instance, starting at the top, thinking about how you can eliminate that risk altogether of people and pedestrians occupying the same space. Whether it's a couple of suggestions, putting an overhead walkway, or setting up your site so that there is perhaps an area where people are not allowed to enter at all, where it's just vehicles. It may require significant change, investment, financial cost, but is it a conversation that you could be having with your senior management team? When it comes to isolation, of course, then it's starting to think about really effective barriers in place, exclusion zones, and there are lots of ideas in the good practice guide. Engineering controls, as technology advances, there are more and more engineering controls, whether OEM or retrofitted, that provide protection for your workers. So there's more information about that in our good practice guide, and thanks to all of you who helped us review and refine that guide. But do something differently. Review your controls and don't wait for something to go wrong. As I've already said, vehicle harms are low frequency but very high impact. So start now to have conversations about putting in higher level controls for your workers who are working in and around vehicles. But what can you do differently around the area of controls? So I've said vehicles, working in and around vehicles causes harm. And I've said everyone has a role to play in doing something differently. And that doesn't just mean you, the industry, that also means us, the regulator. And Worksafe also has a role in this. So I want to update you on a couple of things that Worksafe is up to at the moment, or has just recently been working on. So we are, as an organisation, prioritising risks created by working in and around vehicles. So this is not just something we've done and ticked off. This will be an ongoing focus over the coming months and years. With that comes an increased focus on the transport, postal and warehousing sector. And up to about 15% now of our operational visits take place in this sector. It also means it will be working better with and smarter with NZTA and CVST, sharing information where appropriate, doing stuff together. And if we just go on to the next slide, we've also sort of been focusing on two particular areas, seatbelts and site traffic management. So as I've already mentioned, seatbelts causing about 10 deaths a year. And again, site traffic management, which you're already thinking about recently. So as I said, we've done some good practice guidelines for the site traffic management. And we've also developed a fact sheet around seatbelts, which outlines our expectation that we think it's reasonably practicable that if you are operating a vehicle at work, that you wear your seatbelt, whether on or off road. So there's some more information there. We've done a recent marketing campaign around seatbelts, and we will be seeing throughout the year an increasing focus by our inspectors, our proactive general inspectorate, as they go out to make visits that they will be starting to focus more and more on site traffic management and how businesses are managing that, and also the use and monitoring of seatbelts. So those are our current areas. We are also going to be looking more and more into how we work with across the supply chain and encourage business owners who with more influence about how they can take on more responsibility for managing vehicle related risks. So just an update around some of the things that we are doing. We know that by no means the work is done. This is particularly when it comes to supply chain, this is a big piece of work and requires a lot of change for us about how we investigate, how we prosecute, and how we inspect. So some big changes for us. So I want to make sure that we leave plenty of time for questions and discussions from your end. But before I do, I want to ask you two questions. So I want to leave you with two questions. So if things are to change when it comes to vehicle related harm, and I think the numbers speak for themselves, they need to change. But if things are to change, what are you going to do differently? And then number two, how can Worksafe support you in doing this? And I know that my details will come up later, so do get in touch. Do get in touch with your local office by either calling somebody that you know or using our 0800 numbers. But we do want to support you as you do things differently and make changes in your business. So that's all I wanted to touch on. We've got about 15 minutes left. Do you have questions?
So if you have a question, just pop it in the chat at the bottom, and just while we're waiting for some questions, a couple of questions that have been asked before. So Ruth, you spoke about the new site traffic management guidelines. When will inspectors be starting to review against those guidelines?
You know, increasingly over this year, with a sort of the intention is for a more, and the plan at the moment is for a more intentional focus to start in 1 July, at the beginning of the next year, the next financial year. That doesn't mean that they won't be looking at other things. It doesn't mean that they won't be looking at that before then. But I think it's built, on my understanding, it's built into the business plans to really be a focus from July onwards.
Okay, great. You answered one other question. Another one that's been asked before is by people is that they've tried to talk to their procurement team around getting involved in things like transport contracts, but the procurement team have kind of said, this isn't, this is my business, not your business. What can a health and safety person do in that circumstance?
Yeah. No, and I think that that's a tricky one, Liz. And I think that's why everyone needs to be involved in this conversation. This is part of a conversation that directors need to be involved in, that managers need to be involved in. The health and safety work act can be a good lever, but it's a conversation it's difficult to have on your own. So I'd have thought there may be a way to get your HSRs involved. It could be about having conversations across the organisation or having conversations with other organisations to see how they're doing things.
Yeah, that's where ShopCare can help in terms of connecting people together. If you want to know how another business is doing something, then give us a call and we can potentially connect you with someone that's doing something else different. Can I ask?
Sorry, go on.
Can I ask about diesel fumes? Can you just remind everybody about the number of people that die every year from diesel fumes?
Yeah, around 22 people die every year as a result of exposure to diesel fumes at work. So this is not general pollution. This is exposure at work. So the kind of things starting to look at, do you know what exposure your workers are exposed to when it comes to diesel exhaust fumes? And that's the starting point. We make assumptions it's not an issue, but do you know? Are you testing? Are there, are you still operating a diesel forklift in an enclosed area? Are you looking at how much time engines are spending running in enclosed areas? So you will know for your business where some areas might be for you to start looking at. But I think the first question to really ask yourself is, do you know what exposure your workers are being exposed to? And then take it from there.
I think the other opportunity is actually to ask people.
Yeah, involve your workers. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I've had a question here, which I think has come to me privately, but I think it's a great question for just talking about, we need to take a more risk-based approach to temporary traffic management, not relying on Coptum, but looking at the risk. And I guess I couldn't agree more. Coptum, I think, is not a risk-based system, but it's really important. What are the risks? What are the impacts? How can I be managing those risks appropriately? So that couldn't agree more about that. And actually, Worksafe is doing some work, and this is more aimed at road workers, but is doing some work at how to start to make those risk-based decisions to sit alongside the Coptum from NZPA. Are there any other questions that are coming through, Liz?
No. Oh no, yes, there is. Beg pardon.
Okay.
One that's come to me. Do you see gates as part of this process, as they play a big part in harm in and around docks and properties?
Absolutely. I guess the question there is probably, are they a good control? I presume that's the question. So yes, I would see that as an important part of how you manage that interaction of people and plant. And there are some really smart solutions now, which can be engineering controls for not letting certain vehicles or certain people without the right authorization to enter areas. So I think absolutely gates, controls, barriers. Again, there are some ideas in the good practice guide, but that might be something that as a group through ShopCare, you could be sharing ideas around what works for you. What are some of the good ideas? Because I think it's really important to say that what Worksafe is not saying is that there is no good practice going on. We know there's really good practice going on, and I think a forum like this, where we can put our competitive advantage aside, is a great time and opportunity to say, I'm trying this, it hasn't worked, what are you trying? So there's some great opportunities there that I would encourage you to use and make the most of.
Thanks, Ruth. Can I ask a question of Catherine Rich? Can I put you on the spot, Catherine? This is your first time hearing this presentation, and being a non-health and safety person, what are your thoughts?
I think one of the points that I think that Ruth touched on, and you've actually touched on as well, is the issue of how to raise issues within the workplace when some others on the team will not have the same, or may not have the same focus as the person in charge. And it's always a delicate thing. And I found during the whole COVID process that we all went through, quite often I had some health and safety people saying, oh, look, that they wanted that they were wanting to share some of their ideas, and had found that perhaps it was quite hard emphasizing with others in the leadership team the importance of some of the things they wanted to do. And I suppose it's always I suppose it's the special sauce, I think, that health and safety people bring to the whole process. Because they're focusing on these issues, they're thinking about things in just a much higher detailed level, but to be quite strong with that advocacy. The other thing that I was quite interested in was I'd never seen the breakdown between off-road and on-road, and I was really amazed at the level of the off-road. But when Ruth was talking about farming, that made a lot of sense to me, because although the food, beverage and grocery industry relies on farming, we often don't necessarily think of that part to the same degree as being part of our supply chain, but it actually is, particularly for our members who have growers, fruit and vegetable people. And today I suppose it's just reminded me how expensive that supply chain is, right back from the paddock. The final point I'd make, Liz, is just to emphasise, as you said, shop care can very much be that support to those who are our health and safety leaders, because quite often, it's the same with FGC as well, people say, oh, they like to ring up and know they're not alone with raising issues. And sometimes some people within companies can think, is this just me, or is this, am I just facing this, or are other people facing it too? And I think that's one of the other things that you, Wes, Catherine, and others will no doubt be pretty good at, to be able to say, no, it is an industry issue, and here is some best practice from elsewhere. No, an excellent session, thank you.
And we all need to provide leadership. Just one last question, Ruth, before we wrap up. Does Worksafe connect people with training in these areas? And has Worksafe considered what criteria people should use to find best practice in training?
No, we don't have the resource at the moment to connect people with training, so I suppose we rely on the fact that each business is slightly different, and so you'll be wanting something that's really fit for purpose for you and your context. Having said that, again, that is another way in which an organisation like Shop Care could really be of help, and sharing information around what training has been effective. Now, there was another part to that question, Liz, that I've forgotten. Sorry.
There was two. Does Worksafe connect people with training in these areas? Has Worksafe considered what criteria people should use to find best practice in training?
That's a good question, and not one that I'm aware of having considered. So thank you for that, and I will have a think about if I'm aware of where we've started to do that thinking, or if not, then where might we? So thanks for that.
Okay, thank you so much, Ruth, for all the answers to the questions and coming on board today. There's Ruth's contact details, and Ruth is she's a very friendly person, so please don't hesitate to get in touch if you've got any questions or thoughts for Ruth following this. And I think we've got one more slide. There's Catherine's details and the team at Shop Care's details, and we've got one last poll. Thanks, Shirley.
And the poll's up. We'll just give everybody a couple of minutes to do that. Okay, that's great, everyone. I'll just share the result. Hmm, 68% with immediate team. That's a good number. Okay, thanks everybody. I'll close it now.
Thanks, Shirley, for managing the polls. Thank you, Catherine Rich, for co-hosting with us today. Thank you, Ruth, for your time again today and chatting to the team. And thank you to everyone on the call for coming on and spending some of your time listening to what Ruth has to say. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.